So imagine this. On a bright sunny day, instead of sitting in the closed confines of a cramped classroom, you are out enjoying the great outdoors, breathing in the nice BC air, and of course, being surrounded by the hum of 30,000 bees. You walk up to a hive and you open up its lid and you make a wonderful discovery. Frames laden and dripping with gold sweet honey. A wonderful scent greets your nose and you are immediately mesmerized. You have a zing of zen. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the art of beekeeping, an art so old that it is almost on the brink of extinction. So how old is beekeeping? Well, this is an image. This is a cave painting of an 8,000-year-old hunter-gatherer, honey hunter in Spain, in which he is scaling a cliff to get at the golden treasure stored above. And even today, there are honey hunters in Nepal who still climb the precariously steep cliffs to get at the psychoactive honey produced by the giant honeybee. But so somewhere down the line, a honey hunter decided that while honey was sweet, it wasn't exactly sweet enough to risk your life for it. Thus, beekeeping was born. On the Sun Temple in Egypt, 4,000 years ago, workers are shown blowing calming smoke into the hives as they remove the honeycombs. 3,000 years ago, Fan Li in ancient China wrote about the art of beekeeping in his annals, and the ancient Greeks even minted bee money. The ancient Mayans, who were an entire Atlantic Ocean away from the old world, also practiced their own type of beekeeping with Melipona bees, which I have had the pleasure to visit in Mexico. But don't think that, and these bees are stingerless, but don't think that makes them any easier to take care of though. Those bees bite hard. So, beekeeping isn't just limited to the ancient world, though. In 1852, the Reverend L.L. Langstrand pioneered the Langstrand hive, and what this is basically, you have a box here, and you have different frames, and on each of the frames, the bees colonize them and make their own cells and wax and etc. And so this made it extremely easy to inspect the hive, to collect honey, and to inspect the brood as well, and this is the kind of hive that we use today. But beekeeping hasn't stopped evolving. Recently, I spoke with my grandfather, who was a beekeeper around the 1950s, and from what he told me, I could see not only the changes experienced by the beekeeping industry and the progress, but also the problems that face it. So my grandfather is from Yunnan province, right over here. So beautiful rainforest, amazing floral diversity, and of course, many billions of bees. So my grandfather would keep his bees like this. So he'd have a kettle pot in his yard, and he'd put some brown sugar on it, and he'd wait, and he'd wait, and he'd wait for the rain season to come. And that's where the swarm of bees would fly around. And so a swarm of bees would come around, smell the brown sugar in the kettle pot, and they would settle there and build up a nice colony. And my grandfather had a nice hive of bees in his backyard. So once a year, he'd go down to the hives, and then he'd crack open the lid, and he'd dig out all the contents of the hive with a spoon: honey, wax, brood, everything. And he did this without any protection. So I took my grandfather's example and I compared it with mine. While I get 3 stings in 4 years, he gets 3 stings in 4 milliseconds. While he uses nothing but a trustworthy spoon and his 2 bare hands, I use, in order, a bee suit, smoker, matchbox, hive tools, bee gloves, honey spinner, wax cap remover, formic acid strips, artificial nectar, pollen patties, queen excluder, Benadryl, prednisone, cetirizine, and so on forth. But something that really stood out for me between my grandfather's beekeeping style and mine was that while my grandfather visited his hives once a year, I do hive inspections twice a week. That's 104 more times than my grandfather. Why is this? We can trace this back to our modern beekeeping industry. So modern beekeeping is not based on how much honey you produce or how much wax you make. No. Modern beekeeping is based on the premise of pollination. A beekeeper will rent out his or her hives to different farmers for their pollination services, and that is a big deal. Things ranging from the $3 billion almond industry in California, the cross-pollination needed to produce a large amount of apple crop, and 90% of avocados, cherries, and blueberries, and other crops are pollinated by bees, and well, they should be. Modern pesticide and herbicide use has deterred native pollinators from coming to these farmers' flowers, and to produce a large enough of crop, their best bet is the wren honeybees, which will pollinate only their fruits. The alternative is much bleaker. In some regions in China, pesticide and herbicide use has exterminated native pollinator populations and bee pollinations, as a matter of fact. So these farmers are forced to pollinate the crops by hand, which is not very nice. So beekeepers look at these market conditions and they capitulate on it. So these beekeepers take their thousands and thousands of hives and they load them on lorries or trucks like these, and then they cart them across the country to different farmers and plop them onto different farms for pollination services. So let's say 1 month it could be an apple crop in Washington, and in the next month it could be an almond crop in California. On the third month, a Floridian orange crop needs pollination, and on the fourth, let's say a blueberry farm in Maine. So all this carting around does not breed nice consequences for these bees. Remember, these bees are forced to eat these pesticide and herbicide-laced foods. Up to 30% of them die on transport, compared to 11 to 12% before 1994. And among the survivors, the reality is much bleaker. This long-distance transportation puts them in contact with other hives of bees, and of course, through diseases. Bee diseases such as varroa mite, diseases such as American foul brood, European foul brood, and the most dangerous of all, colony collapse disorder, kills bees overnight. And that, combined with the compromised immune systems of these bees, does not breed a good future for the industry. So I have actually had an experience with bee disease before. So recently, I went down to my beehives and I did a hive inspection. And so I noticed that one of the hives was a little off. There was not that much activity at the front gate. And so I decided to inspect the hive naturally to see if anything was wrong. So when I opened the hive, it looked like this. And what I noticed at first was that there were frames, if you can see this, that there were cells like this, and they were sunken and greasy. And what this means is that this hive may have American foul brood, one of the worst diseases in the beekeeping industry. But I really didn't want to believe that my hives had this, and so I wanted to make sure with a ropiness test. So what I did was that I took a matchstick, as you can see over here, and I plunged it in one of the bee brood cells to extract the larva. If the larva came out in a string-like texture, then I knew that the hives were infected and that they would have to be destroyed. Well, you can guess how the test went. That season, we lost all 6 of our hives from this disease. What we had to do, and it looked like this, and what we had to do is that we had to take our equipment down to Port Coquitlam to the Iotron, where it could irradiate the equipment, and we had to order some new bee stock from Chile. But what we have experienced in this beekeeping club is only a small part of the dangerous reality that faces beekeepers worldwide. Beekeepers are losing thousands upon thousands of bees a day, and that doesn't just mean bad consequences for beekeepers. It also means much for the rest of us who are reliant on the crops that these bees pollinate and propagate. So people are taking measures against this though. Urban beekeeping is widely encouraged and becoming more and more popular, and the City of Vancouver even encourages this urban beekeeping, and that's one of our teachers, Mr. Norm Kadler, at the City Hall rooftop, tending the hives over there. Our school, St. George's, has a beekeeping club, of which I am a proud member and of 4 years, and of course a leader. And what we do is that we teach the art of beekeeping to the next generations to assure a good reserve for this art. And so you look at these measures, but here's the critical thing. As we are dwellers of the city, most of us don't even realize the importance of the agricultural arts. To many of us, the farm feels a long ways away, so long that we don't even realize it when we dig into our food. Many of us take food security, and a full belly for that matter, for granted, and few of us are actually aware of the diseases and the dangers that are plaguing the agricultural industry to this day. Things such as pesticides, herbicides, animal abuse, raging diseases, loss of farming traditions, unsustainable practices. If only we can make the right choice in regards to our consummation practices, then we can make a change to this agricultural industry for the better. If we buy organic, look for artisanal products, or even have our own rooftop gardens, or even better, our own rooftop hives, then we would all be taking a small step to rescuing this large part of our lives. And that, for me, is the bee's knees. Thank you.